The secret of health for both mind and body is not to mourn for the past, worry about the future, or anticipate troubles, but to live in the present moment wisely and earnestly. The Buddha. 2.5 millennia ago, a new religion emerged in the foothills of the Himalayas, generated from the ideas of a single man, the Buddha, a mysterious Indian sage who famously gained enlightenment while he sat under a large, shapely fig tree. It can be argued that this single person made the most significant breakthroughs in freeing the human spirit of any other person in recorded history. This person was also an unlikely hero. He began life as a privileged prince named Gautama Siddhartha, who eventually became an ascetic monk who renounced material wealth. Finally, he settled on a middle path and became known as the Awakened One, or more precisely, the Buddha. Even though the original discourses and techniques taught by the Buddha about 2,500 years ago have been altered over the many years since his enlightenment, enough remains to represent his essential teachings. Very similar to other religions, the practical techniques of his philosophy have been perverted into robotic, dogmatic rituals by misguided devotees and as a self-serving instrument of control by some priests. This is bizarre, since only enlightenment allowed the Buddha to take on that name in the first place. The term Buddha simply means the one who is fully awake. One of his students asked the Buddha, "Are you the Messiah?" "No," answered Buddha. "Then are you a healer?" "No," Buddha replied. "Then are you a teacher?" the student persisted. "No, I am not a teacher." "Then what are you?" asked the student, exasperated. "I am awake," Buddha replied. What Buddha meant by "I am awake" was not the popular New Age idea that he was aware that this material existence is a dream and now he could powerfully manifest here. He had not awakened within the dream, but he had awakened from the dream, from the hypnotic trance of identifying with the illusion as reality. At its core, Buddhism is a philosophy, not a religion. Although followed by millions as a religion, Buddhism can be characterized more correctly as sensible recommendations the rest of us should strive to live by, for our own benefit and all others, as stepping stones toward awakening. The life story of the Buddha is archetypal, as it touches on something we all know deep within ourselves. The real breakthrough, the meaningful core of this teaching, is how a regular person can become a master like the Buddha himself. Enlightenment is merely a new perspective on a new life. Like the old monk saying goes, a person will collect water and chop wood before enlightenment and collect water and chop wood after enlightenment. The Buddha never claimed to be God or his emissary on earth. He said only that he was a human being who, in a world of unavoidable pain and suffering, had found a kind of serenity that others could also find through this practice. The archetypal journey within each of us is striving to reach our own self-actualization. The Buddha encapsulated and simplified his teachings in such a way so that it could remain timeless. He saw the world as full of pain and sorrow, and so it remains today, with an essential caveat. Happiness and beauty are found in the eye of the beholder. Despite his own personal suffering, he found serenity, and his message essentially became, I found it and so can you. When discovering that life is blissful, the Buddha suddenly discovered joy was to be located everywhere. He saw that everything is a matter of perspective. Happy people stay happy, while angry people continue to be angry. Quote, everybody wants happiness, says His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist people. Quote, the purpose of our lives is to be happy, end quote. In a non-religious way, the Dalai Lama proclaimed, you are your own master, encouraging each of us to strive for our own highest purpose. Sometimes the most basic of ethical advice makes the most sense, no matter who the person or what kind of background. A Dalai Lama quote seen on a bumper sticker says, kindness is my religion. He further elaborated by saying, I am convinced that human nature is basically affectionate and good. If our behavior follows our kind and loving nature, immense benefits will result, not only for ourselves, but also for the society to which we belong. I generally refer to this sort of love and affection as a universal religion. Everyone needs it, believers as much as non-believers. This attitude constitutes the very basis of morality, end quote. But even the Dalai Lama takes his cues from the Buddha, whose teachings remain as relevant today as 2,500 years ago. Story of the Buddha. The baby named Gautama Siddhartha was born into royalty in the month of May in the year 642 BCE. The story of the Buddha's life begins within the palace walls of Lumbini, a small city located in what is now southern Nepal. When Buddha was born, Lumbini was a devout Hindu city. Today, the Buddha's birthplace is the Mecca for every Buddhist, being one of the 4 sacred destinations of Buddhism. The 4 places of the Buddhist pilgrimage include the sites of his birth, enlightenment, first discourse, and death. All of these events transpired outside in nature, under the trees. While there is not much particular significance in this, it could explain why Buddhists have always respected the environment and natural law. The Buddha's teachings are a direct result of the moment he attained unsurpassed supreme enlightenment in a place called Bodh Gaya, near the Indian holy city of Varanasi. Among his many profound realizations, the newly attained Buddha discovered a way to resolve basic human misunderstandings. He understood that if he or any person would examine the true nature of oneself, this would lead to compassion for oneself and others. Then, understanding that one's true nature is immortal spirit, acceptance of the impermanence of the physical world will follow, and with it, non-attachment. The corollary of remembering our true nature is the awareness that we are all connected. Coming to these realizations also means we are on the path towards seeing the essence in others rather than judging them. Buddha realized the three poisons afflicting most people were greed, anger, and ignorance. But awareness embraces the possibility of seeing a world in which greed turned around becomes generosity, anger becomes kindness, and ignorance becomes wisdom. After attaining enlightenment at Bodh Gaya, the Buddha went to Sarnath to reveal to others what he had realized. It was here that he preached his first discourse in the Sarnath Deer Park, a moment which would set in motion the, quote, wheel of the Dharma. In this holy site, the stream of the Buddha's teachings first flowed. The Dharma is the scripture of his teachings, but he would also interact and respond to questions from the crowd. After giving a spoken discourse, the Buddha would ask if everyone was clear on what he had said. One time a man stated, "I want happiness." The Buddha instructed to first remove the I, as that's ego. Then remove want, because that's desire. And see now, you are only left with happiness. At 80 years old, the Buddha still walked and taught. On reaching the village of Kushnara, near the border of Nepal on the Hiriyavanti River, he ate spoiled pork and became ill, and soon realized that his end was fast approaching. He asked a student to prepare a bed for him, so his head was turned towards the north between two trees. Buddha put his own death into perspective. Quote, "All things change. Whatever is born is subject to decay." End quote. From this we learn that the material world, which indeed is impermanent, is not our identity. True happiness is connection to the incorruptible inner self. Maintaining connection to this self is the spiritual practice. Then, when the person changes, the culture will soon follow. He wanted all human beings to be happy, large or small. All created things must pass. Strive on, untiringly, diligently. These were the Buddha's last words as he left the world. The middle way. The most enduring aspect of the Buddha's teachings is how he could express such profound wisdom in very basic terms, terms that still make sense today. The Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path of Buddhism give a simple outline on how to live a productive life and accumulate positive karma. As Houston Smith states in his discussion of Buddhism in The World's Religions, the Buddha examined life here to notice people's concerns. The chronic issue is suffering, because life is dukkha, out of joint. This is the overall noble truth. Desire causes suffering, and extinguishing desire frees one from suffering. The treatment for the problem he called the Eightfold Path, which is right views, correct intent, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, and mindfulness. These practices and right thinking demonstrate the way virtually anyone with determination can free themselves from desire and attain personal enlightenment. These teachings are a simple system showing how to be an honorable person, free from all the trappings in life that can potentially hold us back. Certain Buddhist teachings impart that the small ego self is illusionary, and our identification with it causes misery. With a spiritual practice, a person's ego can be gradually undone and its influence greatly reduced in order to be humble enough to strive for enlightenment. Along the way, people should follow a middle path, one that is not too extreme in either direction. The middle way is a change of mind, a shift in perception in which the ego self is removed from the identity equation, resulting in the best possible outcome for all parties. The middle way balances between extremes. An analogy is a musical instrument with strings. If the strings are tied too tight, they break and the music dies. If the strings are too loose, then there will be no sound. But when they are tuned just right, the middle road, the instrument can produce beautiful music. There is no need to believe in any other precept, even reincarnation, to incorporate wisdom into our own worldview. This is the same in every religion, and even atheism. If you take the time to separate the wheat from the chaff, all religions contain wisdom deep within when observing from the middle path. Anytime you take a religion or theology too seriously, controversy inevitably arises and conflicts abound. A Course in Miracles states, quote, "A universal theology is impossible, but a universal experience is not only possible but necessary," end quote. Until we all realize the shortcomings of our purely human-made religions, we are doomed to continuous disappointment. Buddhism is but one teaching point towards truth, but can be misunderstood just as any valid teaching. In its purest form, just using the direct teachings of the Buddha, then Buddhism is a philosophy which, when practiced, can lead to an experience of greater awareness and peace of mind. As with many metaphysical or religious systems, Buddhism has split into two primary schools of emphasis, Theravada and Mahayana. Theravada focuses more on human effort through meditation, a key virtue being wisdom. Mahayana emphasizes human efforts as supported by divine grace and elaborates on metaphysics and ritual, with the key result being compassion. Over the years, doctrinal differences have become less pronounced. Perhaps people are realizing that different strategies for personal transformation are simply different forms with the same goal. This, as the famous finger pointing to the moon. Zen Buddhists remind us that only an experience of transcendent peace and joy is persuasive, an experience of the ineffable which defies verbal logic and explanation. The mind is as restless as a monkey, like a river endlessly flowing, ever-changing, moment to moment. Bliss can be attained for brief moments through meditation, through mindfulness. That is, by learning to observe and thus quiet the monkey mind. While we identify with our small selves, bliss will be temporary and sporadic. Moderation, as a life practice, will help get us through many of the rough patches we encounter. In our ascent, we must pass the base camp before reaching the summit. Of utmost importance to Buddhist practice is the solution to human suffering. Suffering arises from grievances we harbor in the small self-mind. Letting go of grievances with help from the higher mind begins the dissolving of those things blocking peace of mind. Buddha gave us the Noble Eightfold Path, a set of recipes to make our own soup. Understanding reality makes one noble, not caste, not gender, not of race. Enlightenment is the control of mind, which becomes the ultimate form of freedom. Enlightenment. Meditation and yoga were well-established practices in India at the time of Buddha's birth. As an adult, Buddha took these practices to their limits, using them as a temporary escape, but not solving the problem of suffering. Asceticism was mortifying his body to extreme hardship and pain. While he felt he was shedding all his earthly needs, he was also losing weight and becoming terribly weak. He understood life is often painful and that everything is connected. He suddenly realized he did not need to starve himself to advance himself. He came to the conclusion that we can eat and drink and be normal humans. This was the first indication of the middle way. Bodh Gaya is a small town in northeastern India. Pilgrims have been coming here for over 1,600 years to see the location where Buddha became enlightened. No location is more sacred to the 350 million Buddhists worldwide, as this is the point where Buddha radiated while meditating underneath the Bodhi tree. In Bodh Gaya, the descendant tree is still alive. The Bodhi tree still represents the site of enlightenment to Buddhists worldwide. The goal is to achieve nirvana, or enlightenment. Nirvana literally means to blow out or extinguish. This does not mean annihilation in the fearful sense of nothingness, but rather of the false or limited self, leaving only the true self, which has always been there. Buddha did not flaunt or brag after he became enlightened, nor do other Buddhists when they reach enlightenment. Instead, he went about his life along the lines of collecting water and chopping wood before and after enlightenment. Buddhists are encouraged to continue to investigate based on reason and can reject subjects or feelings if they do not feel them to be right. Becoming enlightened is the only way to break the bonds of rebirth, because one's lessons have been learned and there is no need to come back to the physical plane. According to tradition, the Buddha emphasized ethics and correct understanding. He questioned the average person's notions of divinity and salvation. He stated that even the gods are subjected to karma themselves. The Buddha is solely a guide and teacher for the sentient beings who seek to tread the path of nirvana themselves toward the attainment of the spiritual awakening called Bodhi, where they see truth and reality as it really is. The Buddhist system of insight is not a practice that is believed to have been revealed divinely, but instead by the understanding of the true nature of the mind, which must be discovered by personally treading a spiritual path guided by the teachings. Buddha was noted as saying, quote, "He who sees the teaching sees me. He who sees me sees the teaching." We are already enlightened. It resides within us, taught the Buddha near Sarnath, where he gave his first sermons, setting in motion what he called the wheel of Dharma. Sarnath is located close to the sacred city of Varanasi on the Ganges River, the most revered river in the world. Buddha pointed out that every day around us is miraculous. There are cause and effects to everything. Violence always begets violence. We are human and we make mistakes, but the key is to correct any wrongs and keep our minds positive. Of course, we will still feel sad when we hear news of death or war. The Buddha also said that humans are capable of doing incredible damage, which is logical when behavior stems from the fearful, desperate, grasping ego or small self. Similarly, in a book called A Course in Miracle, it notes that the ego's range extends from suspiciousness to viciousness. The following points are a few of the fundamental steps to enlightenment attributed to the Buddha. First, the Four Noble Truths outline that suffering is an inherent part of existence, that the origin of suffering is ignorance, and the main symptoms of that ignorance are attachment and craving. That attachment and craving can be undone, and that following the Noble Eightfold Path will lead to the cessation of attachment and craving, and therefore the end of suffering. The Eightfold Path is right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. These directions are predicted on the notion that every one of us has a soul, and each soul has a spiritual agenda that it seeks to perform in each lifetime. If we don't get it right in one lifetime, we come back to another, and on until the vital lesson is learned. When you finally become ready, you will no longer need to reincarnate, unless you so choose. A bodhisattva is a previously enlightened soul who willingly returns to help advance the human race. Bias of the physical mind is ego-related, while the soul's mind seeks higher goals. There is a mind in the soul which will ultimately integrate and transform your personality in order to reach enlightenment. Dependent origination states that any phenomenon exists only because of the existence of other phenomenon in a complex web of cause and effect covering time, past, present, and future. Peace of mind is not as easy as it might sound. Back in the 1970s, the yogi Ram Dass humorously said, "If you think you're enlightened, just go visit your family." Another way to think about enlightenment is with the concept of Buddha eyes, also called wisdom eyes. Essentially, the ability to look in all directions at once. Seeing with new eyes is an apt Buddhist metaphor. Seeing things as they are, without obstruction, is another description of enlightenment. On the way to this goal, other eye openings occur, such as the third eye, which is said to allow supernormal abilities to energy. Remote viewing becomes possible, as well as contact with other dimensions. In those dimensions, an awakened person becomes as large as the universe. Within a particular dimension, the person has a mirror in front of their forehead. Though invisible in our dimension, everyone has this mirror, but the mirror of a non-practitioner faces inward, because for most people, the pineal body in our brain is shut down. For practitioners, this mirrored image slowly turns over. Then it can reflect what the practitioner wants to see. But the images are fleeting, flipping back and forth ceaselessly, faster than the typical cinematic 24 frames per second, thereby making the images appear continuous and clear. Individuals claiming enlightenment report experience a phenomenon such as this. Quote, "I seek my own enlightenment for the sake of all beings," end quote, is the vow of the Bodhisattva. This vow in service to others allows us to radiate an energy field around ourselves that can actually change how others think and feel when they come in contact with us. The same is true with the Maharishi effect is performed. This is when a group of focused people meditating in unison can effect a macro change worldwide. According to the masters, the enlightenment moment occurs when our inner being totally abdicates to the awareness and concerns of the local self and merge completely with the larger universal consciousness. This union can be achieved only through the abandonment of ordinary thought processes and entry into an ecstatic awareness of being, commonly known as bliss. In Eastern practices, this is accomplished through the release of the Kundalini energies, which travel upward through the system, opening the body to its fullest receptivity and culminating in the embrace of Shakti at the crown. Then, and then only, a person becomes aware of one's own essence and source. This source is the divine, intoxicating, universal energy. At that moment, the rest is irrelevant. For this instant, one transcends all the polarities. One fully experiences in full the meaning of such terms as oneness, union, self, consciousness, bliss, transcendence, merger with the infinite, and the culminating of the lotus opening. For the latter, this is exactly what this experience feels like. The energies having arisen to the open crown now pulse within the brain, exactly as though a many-petaled flower were unfolding in infinite bliss. All this occurs as ecstatic energies from the divine source stream into one's very own skull in an outpouring of unabated, indescribable, overwhelming love. A person has reached enlightenment. Science and enlightenment. A new science and worldview is beginning to dawn, which holds that we will never be able to identify a higher force separately from creation, because this higher power, commonly called God itself, is a part of creation. At a fundamental level, this is difficult to observe, but any mystic will reveal that there is only one creator self. After all, we are all alive, and this life force is ultimately drawn from the same tree. We are them, and they are us. In all our seemingly separate consciousness, wherever there is consciousness, there is merely consciousness by virtue, meaning that everything in the universe, the cosmos, animals, plants, people, are united at our core. This awareness is currently supported by quantum mechanics and string theory, which suggests that we are all just vibrational waves throughout an underlying unified superstring field. There is only one consciousness, and it is residing within all of us. What makes humans so unique is our free will, our ability to choose and determine what we believe and want to focus on. Human beings appear to be different from other sentient beings in the universe who operate more on a hive mind or collective consciousness level. We individualize our conscious through the filter of our nervous system, but the consciousness itself, our very inner subjectivity, the self, in a larger sense, is universal. Experiencing this distinction through experience has been called enlightenment throughout the ages. Your life is a physical manifestation of the thoughts that are processed in your head. We all need to understand this on an individual basis. After centuries of division, science and religion at last are finally finding common ground in the understanding of spirituality through the revolutionary findings of quantum physics. Even the Holy Bible in Proverbs 23:7 confirms this fundamental quantum law of attraction. Quote, as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is, end quote. Spiritual self-awareness is the key to liberation. Unless you are a scientist working at the cutting edge of quantum physics, you have to take on faith what science tells us. What is the difference between reading Stephen Hawking and believing every word, and reading the testimony of illuminated sages and believing them? Either way, if you really want to know, you have to dedicate a lifetime of effort to learning how, and then discover for yourself. Otherwise, it is all faith. True spirituality is a personal quest for each of us, and is as individual to each of us as our own fingerprint. Quantum physics opens the window to a worldview where interstellar space travel, time travel, telepathy, plus other superhuman abilities, and tapping into a universal consciousness can no longer be rationally called impossible. It does make these subjects intriguingly plausible scientific possibilities. Even making contact with ETs is plausible. We stand at a great crossroads when we can awaken to unlimited spiritual possibilities never before imagined. We have the ability to reclaim our sovereignty and ultimately transform this planet from a prison to a paradise. The only thing limiting the progress of each person is him or herself. As we find ourselves on the cusp of a utopian golden age, the Buddha would be proud of our individual progress as benefiting the greater whole. Practicing compassion equals happiness. We can consider following what the Dalai Lama says on happiness. Quote, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion, end quote. Scientific studies, in fact, suggest that there are tangible physical benefits to practicing compassion. People who practice compassion produce 100% more DHEA, which is a hormone that counteracts the aging process, and 23% less cortisol secretions, also known as the stress hormone. There are other benefits as well, which are emotional and spiritual. The main benefit is that compassion helps each of us to become happy, and this, by extension, brings others around us more happiness. If we agree that it is a common aim of each of us to strive to be happy, then compassion is one of the main tools for achieving that happiness. It is therefore of the utmost importance that we cultivate and practice compassion in our lives every day. How do we do that? The key to developing compassion in your life is to make it a daily practice. Start with a morning ritual such as this suggestion by the Dalai Lama. Quote, "Today I am fortunate to have woken up. I am alive. I have a precious human life. I am not going to waste it. I'm going to use all my energies to develop myself, to expand my heart out to others, to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. I am going to have kind thoughts towards others. I am not going to get angry or think badly about others. I am going to benefit others as much as I can." End quote. Make practicing compassion part of your daily routine, and look at the opportunity of serving others as an honor. Turn around greed and indifference to charity and caring. Buddha died at 80. Seen as smiling in his final portraits, often in a reclining pose, ever knowing and confident, so he is about to reach nirvana. The ever popular reclining statues of Lord Buddha represent his final days alive. He seems a being in contented abundance, in an all-knowing perspective, as ageless, as fully alive, with no fear of what lies ahead in the death state. Being alive in the Buddha state is neither male nor female. Anyone can seek the radiance of the living presence, even during their last moments alive. All are born to a great and noble calling, while at the same time, each of us needs to learn profound life lessons. The Buddha would advise us to not cling to the material items of life, as they are fleeting. Also, fleeting is the body, which will inevitably become old and die, only for the spirit to be physically reborn, hopefully next time around in auspicious circumstances. All living things rise and pass away. The lesson to learn is impermanence. Change is not to be feared, just understood as one of the many natural orders. There is no worship of a supreme being in Buddhism when it comes to death. Instead, the focus is on the development of the adherent during this lifetime. Enlightenment is the embodiment of the perfectly fulfilled and completed student, who then becomes a master. Within Buddhism, there is the striving for perfection in all living beings. We already possess a Buddha nature within us. The task is simply to recognize it and become awakened. To get there, we must see beyond our own walls. We must leave the security of the palace while opening to the flow of the eternal now. We must ourselves become a Buddha by making the mind still. When chatter in the head begins, just focus back on the breath. In meditation, this is called being present, the great perfection, giving the enlightened being a perspective that is described as vast and limitless. And that is where every Buddhist strives to be when the spirit leaves the human body. Such a transition would be seamless, a process free of trauma and fear, something which overcomes so many of us shortly before we die. Life and death should be known as inseparable. Death is always with us, knowing that we should smile at the unknown. Meditation is a dress rehearsal for death. The real task in the death process is to invite others in, to grieve with them and express pain. Our relationship to the living also involves losing our life and the loss of those around us. A Buddhist would say, let the Dharma be your guide, be your own light, understand the nature of suffering. The world does not have to be a painful place. Suffering is optional. Understand that your actions have consequences, so strive to leave a suitable path for others to follow. Among the last words of the Buddha was simply, quote, remember me as the one who woke up. Modern interpretations. For a 2,500-year-old religion, Buddhism seems remarkably compatible with the scientifically Western-orientated culture, which may explain its surging popularity here in America. Over the last 15 years, the number of Buddhist centers in the United States has more than doubled to well over 1,000. As many as 4 million Americans now practice Buddhism, surpassing the total of Episcopalians. According to one survey of these Buddhists, half have postgraduate degrees. The Dalai Lama is a known tinkerer of gadgets and is ever curious as to how certain equipment works. He advocates the scientific method, stating, quote, if science proves some belief of Buddhism wrong, then Buddhism will have to change. It's a statement not often heard from leaders of other religions. One modern Western spiritual document, remarkably similar to in the teachings to Buddhism and practiced by millions of spiritual seekers, is entitled A Course in Miracles. Given by a process of inner dictation in the 1960s to an atheistic clinical psychologist, Dr. Helen Schuckman at Columbia University of Physicians and Surgeons, its introduction states, quote, nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God, end quote. It makes a fundamental distinction between the real, called truth, unity, oneness, love, knowledge, and the unreal, called perception, separation, fear, guilt, attack, and thus noting that our perceptual world is illusionary. As Buddha also states, truth is unalterable, eternal, unambiguous. The world of perception, on the other hand, is a world of time, of changes, of beginnings and endings. From truth and perception, two distinct thought systems arise, which are opposite in every respect. All of our behaviors stem from the thought system to which we adhere. So the purpose of the Course is not to teach the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught, but rather to remove the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. A Course in Miracles states, like Buddhism, that everything comes from the mind. The mind is at cause. Everything else is effect. The universe of time and space is gigantic projection, and fixing it will always, eventually, come to naught until we change our minds, until we develop a new consensus reality. Its workbook aims at retraining the mind away from fear and attack and towards love and healing. A change from service to our wealth and security to service to all. This means to do this is by practicing a particular kind of forgiveness, bringing about a fundamental change in perception that results in peace of mind. That change is the quote miracle. The teaching is a brilliant integration of spirituality and psychology. The psychology of how the mind works with its defense mechanisms erected to protect us from our fear of annihilation when we let go of the egotistical small self. To that end, in addition to the text, there is a workbook of 365 lessons. It is designed to help us achieve what Buddhism calls non-attachment. That is, the undoing of our attachment to the false sense of safety we hold in bodily identity and material things, and allowing to emerge instead that which has been covered up, our true identity as unlimited beings. The Course is not a cult or a religion, although it uses religious terminology to discuss universal spiritual themes, partly to redefine religious terms and correct the multiple misperceptions permeating Judeo-Christian Western civilization. It is eminently practical because the miracle shift in perception literally permeates every daily encounter and activity, from saying hello to a stranger in the elevator, to talking with the plumber, to lecturing to a class. It is a psychologically brilliant self-study thought system uniquely formulated for our troubled 21st century Western culture and beyond. Buddhism is functionally a theistic philosophy, even if it avoids using the G word. A Course in Miracles, on the other hand, speaks of the symbol of a loving Heavenly Father, apparently to lessen our largely unconscious fear of an avenging God and all of its misguided associations. Buddhism, like its parent religion, Hinduism, espouses reincarnation, which holds that after death our souls are reinstituted into new bodies, and karma, the law of moral cause and effect, is part of this transformation. Once reborn, the major vehicle for achieving enlightenment is meditation, touted by both Buddhists and alternative medicine gurus as a potent way to calm and begin to free our minds. Ultimately, meditation is a tool for accessing the inner voice and achieving enlightenment and liberation. Western Buddhists sometimes downplay the supernatural elements, insisting that Buddhism is not so much a religion but a practical method for achieving happiness. They depict Buddha as a pragmatist who eschewed metaphysical speculation, then spent the rest of his life focused on reducing human suffering. As the Buddhist scholar Robert Thurman puts out, Buddhism is an inner science, an empirical disciple for fulfilling our mind's potential. The ultimate goal is the state of preternatural bliss, wisdom, and moral grace, and sometimes called enlightenment. However, in the Buddhist version of heaven, one does not have to die to get there. Buddhism is, if anything, pragmatic. Its goal is to move one's experience from a condition of suffering to a condition of non-suffering called nirvana. Buddhism should not be viewed as a collection of concepts or beliefs. Concepts ungrounded in direct experience are useless on a spiritual path. What does it matter if you believe in rebirth or not? Of what bearing does it have on the intent of the Buddha's teaching? Absolutely nothing. Nirvana is a lived experience or condition that resolves human suffering. Concepts are useless if they do not support this intent. The whole secret of existence is to have no fear, said the Buddha. Let truth be your light, meaning if we could lose our irrational fears and instead embrace truth and love, we have half the battle won. The Buddha was asked, "What have you gained from meditation?" He replied, "Nothing." However, the Buddha continued, "Let me tell you what I lost: anger, anxiety, depression, insecurity, fear of old age, and death." Looking inward upon ourselves is an individual endeavor with perhaps nothing to gain but many things to lose. These are the ever-enduring lessons from one of the greatest masters on earth who has ever known, with his being these closing words, quote, "In the end, only three things matter: how much you have loved, how gently you have lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you." End quote.